The cigarette smoke hung low and heavy, a gray cloud suffocating the small, dim room, while the sound of clinking glasses was louder than the piano. It was 2 a.m. in a forgotten corner of New Jersey, miles away from the bright lights of New York City, and the man on stage was dying a slow, public death. He wasn't bleeding, but his soul was being carved out, piece by piece, by the indifference of the drunk crowd. He hit a flat note on the piano, a mistake born of exhaustion and despair, and a harsh laugh erupted from the back booth. He wanted to scream. He wanted to flip the piano over. Instead, he just closed his eyes, swallowed the lump in his throat, and prepared to quit music forever. But what he didn't see was the solitary figure sitting in the darkest shadow of the room, a man in a trench coat and a fedora, nursing a glass of Jack Daniels with 2 ice cubes, watching every move with eyes that had seen everything. By the way, tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? Let's go back to the beginning of this long, cold night in November 1951. The man on stage was named Danny Rourke. He was 26 years old, skinny as a rail, with a cheap suit that was shiny at the elbows and a heart full of dreams that were rapidly turning into nightmares. Danny was a crooner. He worshipped the great American songbook. He wanted to sing about love, about heartbreak, about the moon and the rain. But it was 1951, and the world was changing. The crowd in this dive bar, the Rusty Anchor, didn't want ballads. They wanted noise. They wanted fast tempo. They wanted to drink and forget, not listen and feel. Danny had been playing here for 3 weeks, and every night was a battle. The owner, a sweaty man named Sal, had given him an ultimatum earlier that evening. "You bore him again tonight, kid, and you're out. I got a jukebox that don't ask for a paycheck." That threat was ringing in Danny's ears as he touched the ivory keys. He had rent due. His mother was sick in a small apartment in Hoboken, waiting for him to bring home a few dollars for medicine. The weight of the world was pressing down on his narrow shoulders. He felt like a fraud. He felt invisible. Danny launched into Stardust. It was a beautiful song, a masterpiece. But in his hands tonight, it felt heavy. His voice, usually a warm baritone, was trembling with anxiety. He wasn't singing to the audience. He was singing to avoid their gaze. He rushed the tempo, trying to get it over with. A beer bottle cap flicked onto the stage, bouncing off the wood near his foot. "Play something with a pulse, you bum!" a voice shouted. Danny froze. His hands hovered over the keys. The silence that followed wasn't respectful. It was predatory. Now, imagine the other side of this coin. Across the river, in the high-rise luxury of Manhattan, the man in the trench coat had started his evening. His name was Francis Albert Sinatra, but in 1951, he wasn't the chairman of the board yet. Not really. He was in the slump. The press said he was washed up. His voice was supposedly gone, ruined by vocal cord hemorrhages and emotional turmoil. Ava Gardner was driving him crazy. The movie studios were cold. The phone wasn't ringing as much as it used to. Frank Sinatra, the man who had made teenage girls faint in the aisles of the Paramount just a few years prior, was feeling a sensation he despised: vulnerability. He couldn't sleep. The silence of his hotel room was deafening. It was filled with the whispers of critics, the doubts of his friends, the fear that maybe, just maybe, the ride was over. He needed to escape. He needed to be where the air was real, where the polish was rubbed off. He told his driver to take the night off. He grabbed his hat, the brim snapped down low to cover those famous blue eyes, and he hailed a cab. "Just drive," he told the hack. They ended up crossing the bridge, drifting into the blue-collar neighborhoods that smelled of rain and asphalt. Frank saw the neon sign of the Rusty Anchor flickering like a dying heartbeat. It looked like the kind of place where nobody would ask for an autograph, because nobody would expect a god to walk amongst mortals. He paid the driver and walked in. He slipped into the back booth, the one where the shadows were deepest. He ordered a drink and told the waitress to keep them coming and to keep her mouth shut. He just wanted to listen. He wanted to see if music still lived in the gutter, because he felt like he was in the gutter himself. When he saw the kid, Danny, on stage, Frank didn't feel pity immediately. He felt critical. He watched the kid's posture. Slouching, Frank thought. He's closing off his diaphragm. He's scared. Frank knew fear. He lived with it every time he stepped towards a microphone. But the difference was, Frank knew how to turn fear into energy. This kid was letting fear eat him alive. Danny started a second song, I'm a Fool to Want You. It was ironic. It was one of Frank's songs, a song born of his tortured love for Ava. Hearing this skinny kid butcher the phrasing was painful. Danny was singing the notes, but he wasn't singing the words. He was rushing through the pain, trying to get to the end of the line. Slow down, Frank whispered to his glass. Taste the word, kid. Don't just spit it out. But Danny couldn't hear him. The crowd was getting rowdier. A group of dock workers near the front were laughing loudly, turning their backs on the stage. The disrespect was palpable. Danny stopped playing. His hands dropped to his sides. He looked at the crowd, then at the empty tip jar. Tears pricked his eyes, hot, humiliating tears. He stood up, knocking the piano bench back with a screech. I'm done, Danny mumbled into the microphone, though nobody was listening. I quit. He reached for his coat on top of the piano. This was it. The end of the dream. He would go work on the docks. He would drive a truck. He would do anything that didn't involve baring his soul to people who didn't care. That's when the atmosphere in the room shifted. It wasn't a sound. It was a change in air pressure. The man in the back booth stood up. He didn't rush. He moved with a feline grace, a predator's confidence mixed with a king's authority. The trench coat was open, revealing a sharp suit underneath. He walked out of the shadows and into the smoky light. Frank Sinatra walked toward the stage. He didn't look at the hecklers. He didn't look at the bartender. He looked straight at Danny. The waitress dropped a tray. The sound of shattering glass cut through the noise. Heads turned. Silence rippled outward from the center of the room like a shock wave. It started with the table nearest the aisle, then the bar, then the loud dock workers. One by one, they saw him. The face was unmistakable. The cheekbones, the jawline, the eyes that could burn a hole through steel. Sit down, kid, Frank said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried to every corner of the room. It was the voice of authority. It was the voice that could stop traffic on Fifth Avenue. Danny froze. He blinked, thinking he was hallucinating from hunger and stress. Mr. Sinatra? I said sit down, Frank repeated, reaching the stage. He didn't jump up. He stepped up, treating the riser like the steps of the copa. He walked over to the piano, took the fedora off his head, and placed it gently on the lid. You ain't finished yet. If you love stories about the hidden moments that define legends, make sure you subscribe for new stories right now, because we are just scratching the surface of this night. Danny sat back down on the bench, his legs shaking so hard he had to press his feet flat against the floor to stop them. I can't, Mr. Sinatra. They hate me. I'm no good. Frank leaned in close, ignoring the microphone. They don't hate you, Pally. They just don't believe you. And you know why? Because you don't believe you. Frank turned to the crowd. He didn't smile. He looked at the dock workers who had been heckling. He stared them down until they shifted in their seats, suddenly looking like schoolboys caught by the principal. You boys thirsty? Frank asked the room. Yeah, someone stammered. Good. Then shut up and drink while the man plays, Frank snapped. The command was absolute. Then he turned back to Danny. "Do you know one for my baby?" Danny nodded. "Yes, sir, I know it." "No, you don't know it," Frank corrected him softly. "You've heard it. You've memorized the notes, but you don't know it. Tonight, you're gonna learn it." Frank loosened his tie. "Play it. But play it like it's 3 a.m., and you've got nowhere to go but the bottom of the bottle. Don't play it for them. Play it for me." Danny placed his fingers on the keys. He took a breath. He looked at Frank Sinatra, who was standing right there in the crook of the piano, leaning against it with a cigarette unlit in his hand. Danny played the opening chord, E-flat. "Too fast," Frank whispered. "Drag it, make it hurt." Danny slowed down. He let the silence between the notes hang in the air. He started to sing. "It's 2:45. "No," Frank cut him off gently. He didn't take the mic. He just sang over Danny's shoulder, his voice a rich, dark velvet that instantly filled the room. "It's 2:45. Frank sang it not as a lyric, but as a confession. He stretched the word 3 until it broke. "See?" Frank said. "You're telling a story, kid. You're talking to Joe, the bartender. He's the only friend you got left. Try again." Danny tried again. He mimicked Frank's phrasing. "Don't copy me," Frank warned, his eyes narrowing. "Be you. What hurts you, kid? What's eating you up inside?" Danny thought of his sick mother. He thought of the eviction notice. He thought of the 3 years of rejection. The pain welled up in his chest, hot and sharp. He channeled that into the next line. "There's no one in the place except you and me." Frank smiled. A small, sad smile. "That's it," he whispered. "Now you're bleeding. Keep bleeding." For the next 4 minutes, the rusty anchor ceased to exist. It became a cathedral of loneliness. Danny played, and Frank guided him. Sometimes Frank would sing a line, demonstrating the perfect breath control, the way to bend a vowel to extract the maximum emotion. Sometimes he would just nod, conducting Danny with a subtle movement of his cigarette hand. The crowd was mesmerized. Nobody moved. The ice melted in their glasses. The smoke swirled around the 2 men on stage, the legend and the nobody, connected by the invisible thread of the music. Frank wasn't performing for a stadium. He was performing a masterclass for an audience of 1. He was teaching Danny that the song wasn't about the notes. It was about the truth. When they reached the climax of the song, "So make it one for my baby, and one more for the road," Frank stepped back and let Danny take the final line alone. Danny closed his eyes. He didn't push. He didn't strain. He just whispered the words, letting them float away like smoke. He held the final chord, letting it fade into absolute silence. For 5 seconds, there was no sound in the bar, just the hum of the refrigerator. Then, the dock worker who had heckled him stood up. He didn't cheer. He just started clapping. Slow, heavy claps. Then the next table joined in. Then the whole room. It wasn't the raucous screaming of a pop concert. It was the deep, respectful applause you give to someone who has just survived a war. Danny looked up, dazed. He looked for Frank. But Frank was already putting his hat back on. He was moving toward the door. He didn't wave to the crowd. He didn't bow. He had done what he came to do. Danny jumped off the stage and ran after him, catching him just as he pushed open the heavy wooden door to the rainy street. "Mr. Sinatra, wait!" Frank stopped and turned, the collar of his trench coat turned up, against the drizzle. "Thank you," Danny gasped. You saved me. Why? Why did you do that?" Frank looked at the kid. He saw the fire in Danny's eyes, a fire that hadn't been there an hour ago. "I didn't do anything, kid. You had the song in you. You were just afraid to let it out." Frank lit his cigarette, the flame illuminating his face for a split second. "Fear is good. Fear keeps you sharp, but don't let it drive the bus. You understand?" "Yes, sir," Danny said. "And kid?" Frank paused. "Get a better suit. You look like you slept in a dryer." Frank winked, turned, and walked into the misty night, disappearing as quickly as he had arrived. A phantom in a fedora. But the story doesn't end there. The truly shocking part was still ahead. The next day, Danny Rourke went to the pawn shop and sold his watch, his father's watch, to buy a decent suit. He went back to the rusty Anchor that night. Sal, the owner, looked at him differently. "I heard you had a guest last night," Sal grunted. "Place is packed tonight. Everyone wants to see the kid Sinatra sang with." Danny sat at the piano. He didn't play Stardust. He played One for My Baby. And he played it with the soul of a man who had looked into the abyss and blinked. He wasn't Frank Sinatra. He would never be Frank Sinatra. But for the first time, he was fully Danny Rourke. Weeks turned into months. The legend of that night grew. People claimed Frank had sung a whole set. Others claimed he had bought everyone drinks. The truth was simpler and more profound. Frank had given Danny permission to be an artist. But here is the twist that nobody saw coming. 3 years later, in 1954, Frank Sinatra had made the greatest comeback in entertainment history. He had won the Oscar for From Here to Eternity. He was recording his masterpiece albums at Capitol Records. He was the king of the world again. One night in Hollywood, at a fancy party in Beverly Hills, a producer was bragging to Frank about a new songwriter he had found. "This kid writes songs that tear your heart out, Frank. You gotta hear his demo." Frank, holding a martini, looked bored. "I've heard 'em all, Charlie." "Not like this," the producer insisted. He put a vinyl onto the turntable. The crackle of the needle filled the room, followed by a piano intro. It was a simple ballad, melancholic and tender. The voice on the record wasn't Frank's style, but the writing. The writing was pure gold. Frank tilted his head. He listened to the lyrics. It was a song about a man in a bar, late at night, being saved by a stranger. It was called The Angel in the Fedora. "Who wrote this?" Frank asked, his eyes narrowing. "Kid named Danny Rourke," the producer said. "From Jersey. Says he met you once." Frank froze. The memory of that rainy night in the dive bar came rushing back. The smoke, the stale beer, the skinny kid shaking in a cheap suit. He remembered the fear in the kid's eyes, and he remembered the moment the fear turned into art. Frank smiled, a genuine warm smile that reached his eyes. "Yeah," Frank said softly. "I know the kid. He's got good phrasing." Frank didn't record the song. He felt it was too personal, too much of a direct tribute. But he made a phone call the next morning. He called the owner of the Copacabana in New York. "Jules," Frank said, "I got an opener for you next month. Kid named Rourke. Treat him right, or you answer to me." Danny Rourke never became a household name like Sinatra or Bennett. He didn't sell millions of records. But he worked. He worked for 40 years. He played the best clubs in New York and Chicago. He raised a family. He bought his mother a house. He lived a life of music, a life of dignity. And every night, before he finished his set, he would tell the story of the night the chairman of the board walked into a dive bar and taught him how to breathe. If you are enjoying this journey through time, please pause for a second and subscribe for new stories. It really helps us bring these hidden gems to life for you. Danny passed away in 1996. Among his belongings, his daughter found a small, framed telegram. It was dated 1954, the night of Danny's debut at the Copacabana. The telegram was simple. It read, "You look good in the suit, kid. Keep telling the truth. FS." This story isn't just about Frank Sinatra being a nice guy. It's about something deeper. It's about the responsibility of mastery. Frank didn't just walk into that bar to stroke his ego. He walked in because he heard a wounded animal and he knew he had the medicine. He knew that the only sin in art is dishonesty. He saw Danny lying to the audience, pretending to be happy, pretending to be fast, and he couldn't stand it. He taught Danny that the audience doesn't want you to be perfect. They want you to be real, they want to see your scars, because it reminds them of their own. When Frank stepped out of the shadows, he wasn't just saving a show, he was validating a life. How many of us are like Danny? Sitting in a job we hate, living a life that doesn't fit, wearing a cheap suit of expectations that isn't ours? We rush through the day, trying to please the crowd, trying to avoid the hecklers. We are afraid to slow down, afraid to let the silence hang in the air, because we are afraid that if we stop, people will see that we are broken. But Frank's lesson is clear. Be broken. Sing the brokenness. That's where the magic is. Frank Sinatra was a complex man. He had a temper. He had demons. He wasn't a saint. But on that night in 1951, he was an angel with a cigarette and a glass of whiskey, but an angel nonetheless. He showed us that true leadership isn't about standing above people. It's about standing next to them and saying, "I know the tune. Let me help you find the key." Before we get to the final thought, I have a request. If this story moved you, please subscribe for new stories. We have so many more tales of the legends that shaped our world. Think about your own life. Is there a Danny in your world? Someone who is trying, failing, and about to give up? Maybe a coworker, a child, a friend? You don't need to be Frank Sinatra to help them. You don't need to be famous. You just need to walk out of the shadows, sit down next to them and say, "You're not done yet. Try again. I'm listening." Sometimes, the greatest gift you can give a person is simply your attention. In a world that is screaming for fast, loud, and new, be the person who appreciates the slow, the quiet, and the real. Because in the end, we are all just singing in a smoky room, hoping someone hears us. We are all waiting for that nod of approval from the back booth. And if we are lucky, we might just get to play one for our baby, and one more for the road. Before you go, hit that subscribe for new stories button one last time. And remember, the next time you hear a Sinatra song, don't just listen to the voice. Listen to the silence between the notes. That's where the truth lives. That's where the man in the fedora is still waiting, watching, and reminding us to do it our way. The lights are dimming now. The bartender is wiping down the counter. The music is fading. But the story never ends. Keep the faith, Pally. And good night. Wait, don't click away yet. There is one final detail I left out. The piano Danny played that night? The old chipped upright at the rusty anchor? Years later, when the bar was demolished, a collector bought the piano. He found something carved into the wood, right under the music stand. It was faint, scratched with maybe a key or a penknife. It simply said, "Deck 1951. The voice was here. Was it true? Or was it just another layer of the legend? We will never know for sure. But in a way, it doesn't matter. Because Frank Sinatra is everywhere. In every heartbreak, in every toast, in every lonely walk home in the rain. He is the soundtrack of our lives, the ghost in the machine, the friend who tells us it's okay to cry as long as you look good doing it. If you enjoyed this, share it with someone who needs a little hope today, and subscribe for new stories because the past is full of secrets waiting to be told. See you in the next one.